The fire is rolling. The brisket is on. And this is the inaugural episode of Cooking with Shockey. Hey everybody, my name is Ryan O'Shockey, and I'm going to take you through my very first brisket cook on this offset smoker. So this smoker is actually an Old Country Barbecue Pit's Brazos DXL. This particular pit is 1/4-inch steel all the way around, double-walled insulated. So this is going to give us the most heat retention that we can possibly get on an old country barbecue pits. So as I said, I have a brisket on here. So what I've done so far, I got this smoker yesterday. Last night I went through and burned in the entire smoker. So what I did is I took all of my wood, my lump charcoal, I lit a charcoal chimney with the lump charcoal. I got my logs on the fire and I brought the temperature all the way up to about 450, 475 degrees for about an hour and burned this in. Prior to that, I wanted to make sure that we seasoned the smoker. So what I did is I went ahead and I took some Pam cooking spray, 2 full cans that you can buy at your local grocery store. My sons and I went ahead and sprayed every inch of this cooker down, inside and out, firebox, cooking chamber, stack, everything. We went ahead and then burned in that oil, which gave us a good season on the smoker to give us some protection against the elements, against rust, and to make sure that this smoker is going to go ahead and last. Once we did that, I let the coals burn down. I opened up all the doors. I let this thing cool down overnight. And in the morning, I went ahead, cleaned the firebox out, loaded some fresh coals, got my chimney started again. And then I went ahead, put some logs on the fire, brought the pit up to about 250 degrees, which is where I'm cooking this brisket now. And then I went ahead and put my brisket on. Now for the brisket itself, the brisket went on at about 7:30 this morning. I used the same thing that Goldie's Barbecue does. So my rub is basically half black pepper, 16 mesh coarse ground black pepper, half kosher salt, at a 50-50 mix. And then on top of that, I add some Lowry's and then some garlic powder as well. Shake that up, put it into a shaker for myself, season the entire brisket after I went ahead and trimmed it. And it is a full packer brisket that's on here. Didn't use a slather. I don't like typically using a slather. I think it gets a bit gunky and it gums up the rub a little bit. And I think it also provides some kind of a barrier so the smoke can't penetrate as well. You can use oil, you can use yellow mustard if you want to. That's totally fine. I decided not to go with it. The brisket was tacky enough without it. So I went ahead with my 16 mesh ground pepper, kosher salt, Lowry's, and garlic powder. Put that rub on there, got the brisket on the smoker itself. Again, that was about 7:30 this morning. We're still sitting here at about 2:30 in the afternoon. The color's looking pretty good. I'm about to wrap this brisket. I do decide to wrap this brisket in butcher paper. So every once in a while, I'll let a brisket go all the way without wrapping it, but I do enjoy the wrap. I think it retains enough moisture, but also preserves the bark. So we're gonna take a look at this brisket here in just a minute, just before we wrap it and show you what it looks like. Okay, so we're back to the brisket wrap. I've had my brisket on for about 6.5 hours at this point. I like the color, I like the consistency of it. At this point, we're gonna go ahead and wrap. Now, I tend to wrap in butcher paper. I don't like to use foil. Foil makes it a little steamy, a little pot roasty. It can ruin the bark that you work so hard to preserve. Now, I like butcher paper. I always double wrap it. So I go ahead and overlay one piece over another. That gives me a nice even section in the center where the brisket is actually going to sit. And then I'm gonna actually spritz it with some apple cider vinegar to make it a little bit more pliable, so when we wrap, it'll actually stay together. It actually holds a little bit more moisture retention as well. But this butcher paper here is Reynolds Wrap butcher paper, and it comes with a convenient little strip across there, so we can go ahead and cut it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold this down. I'm gonna spritz my butcher paper. Again, this is to hold a little bit of moisture, but more importantly, to make it a little bit more pliable when we go ahead and wrap the brisket. When I do wrap my brisket, I like to put a little bit of fat in there with the brisket. So when I do wrap my brisket, I do want to put a little bit of extra fat in the wrap with the brisket itself to keep the moisture content high. What I typically do is I put smoked tallow, Wagyu beef tallow, or the trimmings from the brisket I'll render down into beef tallow and smoke it in the smoker with the brisket to put it in here. However, I did not have a pan to put them in today, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some butter. Just an easy fat. This is non-salted butter, and it's just going to help us retain some moisture content inside the wrap with the brisket to keep it nice and juicy as it goes back on the pit with the wrap. So our brisket is just about to wrap. Again, we've been here for about 6.5 hours on the stick burner. It's got a really nice color, really good bark. We're going to take a look with the Thermapen, and we're going to look and see exactly what it is internal temperature wise. Now, I don't typically go just by internal temperature. I always go by look. So this looks really great. Dark mahogany color, nice bark. As you can see, that bark is set. The fat is starting to render. Nice yellow fat down here. And that's my ThermoPro going off, telling me my pit is too low. Right, so we're gonna go in here and take a look at this. Right here, I got 171 in the point, 193 in the flat, and kind of 172 right in the center where my other thermometer is. So that's looking really good. We're gonna go ahead and wrap that. Don't worry about the little pooling. Sometimes you're gonna get that right in the soft spots in the middle. You'll get this pooling around here where the rendered fat will collect. That's totally okay. We're gonna keep that in the wrap, and we'll get this off the pit and into the wrap. Now that we've got our brisket off the pit and onto our wrap, again, it's sitting on those pads of butter, unsalted of course. Now I'm just gonna put a couple pads of butter just on top of our brisket so that it sits nice in the wrap, has some good unsalted fat to keep it nice and moist. So what I'm gonna do is, this brisket is extremely hot, so I'm gonna get this a nice tight wrap, once over the back, down the sides, wrap that over for us, and here we go. One, pull it back nice and tight. Second wrap here. Right. And then I'm gonna keep that nice and tight right here. So this wrap is now gonna go back onto the smoker. I'm actually gonna do something that few people have probably tried before. My offset, which is over there, my stick burner, I am low on wood. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stick it back in my pellet smoker to finish off as we go through the end of this cook. So here I am, right here back in the pellet smoker, nice and wrapped up tight with that butter, and we'll see you back when it's probe tender. And we're back. We have this fresh brisket in the oven. Now, I told you before we left that we were gonna finish it in the pellet smoker. However, we had an issue with the pellet smoker, so this is me adjusting on the fly. Now, this brisket is done. It's probe tender. Now, I always go by tenderness, not by temperature. You see, I have a ThermoPro in my hand. However, you're gonna look at the temperature and think, ooh, maybe you should have taken it a little further. It's all about how it feels. It's super loose, it's super tender, and I'll show you why. Now, this thing is screaming hot, so I'm gonna slide this out here. As you can see, I got my meter probe in there, which gives me the ambient temperature and the temperature inside the brisket itself, and you can see the 3 probe holes that I have. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna probe into it, and I'm looking for that thing to feel just like butter. No resistance at all. You can see I can use 2 fingers on this Thermapen, and it just slides right in. I don't have to push it. Now, what I'm looking at right now, if you can see that on the camera, maybe 197 in the point. I'm sitting at about 202 in the center and about 204 in the flat. Now, usually I say take your brisket to 203, sometimes even 208, and that's when it's tender. But this proves it's not about the temperature, it's about the feel. If I can take, this is how I usually do it, if I can take 2 fingers on my Thermapen and I can go through it and I don't have to push, it's tender. I probe in 3 places. I probe in the point, I probe in the middle, and I probe in the flat, and that gives me a good idea. If I'm probe tender in all three places, it is done. I'm pulling it, and I'm calling this brisket done. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this brisket out of my oven. I'm gonna put it in a dry cooler to rest. It's 4:30 right now. I'm gonna serve this brisket at about 6 o'clock, and it should be ready to go by then.